Imagine seeing the world not as it is, but as your mind reshapes it. Colors pulse with an intensity others can't perceive. Patterns emerge where none should exist. Your own reflection becomes a grotesque stranger. For people with schizophrenia, this is reality, and some of them have captured this inner world on canvas. Today, we're looking at the disturbing works of two artists who documented their schizophrenia through art. Wain, whose charming cat illustrations underwent a terrifying transformation, and Bryan Charnley, who recorded his final weeks before suicide in brutal self-portraits that visualize the hell of psychosis. Before we dive into their work, let's briefly understand what schizophrenia actually is. Schizophrenia is a severe mental disorder that affects how a person thinks, feels, and perceives reality. It's characterized by hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that aren't there, delusions, which are false beliefs disconnected from reality, and disorganized thinking that makes it difficult to communicate coherently. But here's what most people don't understand. Schizophrenia doesn't just create imaginary voices or paranoid thoughts. It fundamentally alters how you process visual information, how you perceive space, color, and even the structure of objects around you. Your brain is receiving the same visual input as everyone else, but it's interpreting it completely differently. This is why art created by people with schizophrenia is so fascinating and unsettling. When these artists create, they're not just painting what they imagine, they're documenting what they actually see and feel. Their art becomes a window into a reality most of us will never experience. Common visual manifestations in schizophrenic art include fragmentation and distortion, where objects and faces break apart, reflecting the fractured perception of reality. Intense, unnatural colors appear because the brain's altered processing can make colors appear more vibrant, more threatening, or completely different from how neurotypical people perceive them. Many schizophrenic artists become obsessed with repetitive patterns and geometry, possibly reflecting how their brain tries to impose order on chaotic sensory input. Hallucinations and delusions often manifest as specific recurring symbolic imagery that represents the artist's internal struggle. And perhaps most unsettling is the loss of perspective and spatial coherence, where the normal rules of space, depth, and proportion break down, creating impossible compositions that feel fundamentally wrong. Now let's see how two of the most famous artists with schizophrenia captured their deteriorating mental state on canvas. Wain was a beloved English artist in the late 1800s and early 1900s, famous for his anthropomorphic cat illustrations. His charming, whimsical cats were everywhere, in newspapers, on postcards, in children's books. He was a household name, but in his later years, Wain developed schizophrenia, and his cats changed. Let's look at one of his early pieces, two fluffy white cats with blue shading, depicted in a sweet, romantic scene. One cat tenderly embraces the other against a backdrop of an ornate Spanish or Mediterranean building. The style is illustrative, almost storybook-like. The cats have large, expressive eyes and maintain their feline proportions while engaging in human-like behavior. This is classic Wain, charming, accessible, and completely non-threatening. There's nothing here that suggests the artist's mind is fragmenting. But here's what's important to understand. These aren't disturbing paintings in the traditional sense. They're not grotesque or violent. And that's precisely what makes them so fascinating when we understand what they represent. What we're seeing in Wain's progression isn't horror, it's the slow transformation of perception itself. As his schizophrenia developed, Wain didn't start painting monsters, he kept painting cats. But the way he saw cats, the way he processed their form, color, and place in space, fundamentally changed. Now look at one of his later works. The change is dramatic. This cat has become almost entirely abstract, rendered in electric, vibrant colors with stark contrasts. The face is frontal and symmetrical, with enormous, piercing eyes that stare directly at you. But what's most striking is what's happened to the body and the background. They've merged into a kaleidoscope of geometric patterns, intricate, repetitive designs that seem to pulse with energy. The cat is no longer a creature in space, it's become part of the pattern itself. The boundaries between the subject and its environment have dissolved. This is where we see schizophrenia manifesting in Wain's work. Notice how the patterns are obsessively detailed, how every space must be filled with intricate designs. This horror vacui, the fear of empty space, is common in schizophrenic art. The mind seeks order, seeks to fill every void with meaning and structure, even when that structure becomes overwhelming. The colors have also intensified dramatically. The blues, oranges, and yellows are almost fluorescent, unnaturally bright. This likely reflects how schizophrenia can alter color perception, making them appear more intense, more saturated, sometimes even changing their hue entirely. What we see as soft pastels might have appeared to Wain as these electric, almost psychedelic tones. Wain's brain was imposing perfect geometric order onto organic forms. The cat's face remains recognizable, but everything else has been transformed into repeating patterns that follow mathematical principles. What's deeply unsettling about Wain's later work isn't that it's grotesque, it's that it shows us how schizophrenia doesn't just add things to your perception, like hallucinations or voices. It fundamentally rewrites the rules of how you see reality. Space, form, color, the boundaries between objects, all of this becomes fluid and uncertain. Wain was still painting what he saw, but what he saw was a world where the distinction between cat and background, between living creature and abstract pattern, had collapsed. His technical skill remained intact, the detail and precision are remarkable, but the perceptual framework guiding that skill had been completely altered by his illness. While Louis Wain's transformation shows us the gradual dissolution of perceptual boundaries, our next artist documented something far more immediate and brutal. Bryan Charnley was a British artist who lived with schizophrenia for most of his adult life. Unlike Wain, whose illness developed slowly, Charnley was acutely aware of his condition and chose to document it explicitly. In 1991, just weeks before his suicide, he created a series of 17 self-portraits, one for each day, while experimenting with changes to his medication. These paintings are visceral, raw depictions of what psychosis actually feels like from the inside. Let's look at one of these self-portraits. This is not the gentle transformation we saw with Wain. This is psychological horror made visible. Charnley's face dominates the composition, rendered with brutal honesty, wearing large glasses that frame his haunted eyes. But the painting doesn't stop at portraiture. It's invaded by symbolic imagery that represents his hallucinations and delusions. In the center of his forehead, overlaying his face, there's a figure holding what appears to be a golden chalice or trophy. This figure seems to be emerging from or imposed upon Charnley's own head, representing perhaps a religious delusion or the feeling that his thoughts are being controlled or observed by others. To the right of his face, there's a striking vertical spine-like structure, rendered in stark black and white stripes, with a yin-yang symbol at its base. This spinal imagery appears in several of Charnley's works and likely represents his feeling that his body is being invaded, that something foreign is inside him. What makes this painting so disturbing is how Charnley has layered these hallucinatory elements directly onto his realistic self-portrait. He's showing us that these aren't separate from him, they are his experience of himself. When he looks in the mirror, these images, these symbols, these intrusions are part of what he sees. Notice also the background elements, dark, somewhat chaotic, with what appears to be a small bare tree and other fragmented imagery. There's no peaceful, coherent environment here. Everything is fractured, overlapping, competing for space in the composition, just as competing thoughts, voices, and perceptions compete for space in a schizophrenic mind. The color palette is also telling. The face itself is rendered in relatively naturalistic flesh tones, but the hallucinatory elements are more vibrant. This contrast emphasizes the distinction between external reality and internal experience, but also shows how the two are inextricably merged. Charnley also included written notes with many of these self-portraits, describing his symptoms and medication changes. This wasn't just art, it was documentation. He was trying to show the world what schizophrenia actually looks like from the inside, how it feels to have your sense of self invaded by images and ideas you can't control. The tragedy of Charnley's work is that it's a countdown. These 17 paintings trace his deterioration as his medication changes failed to help him. Each painting becomes more fragmented, more desperate. And then, after the 17th portrait, he took his own life. He was 41 years old. What both Louis Wain and Bryan Charnley show us is that schizophrenia doesn't just affect what you think, it affects what you see, how you experience yourself, and how you understand your place in reality. Wain's work shows the slow dissolution of perceptual boundaries, where the world becomes pattern and symmetry, where color intensifies beyond normal experience. Charnley's work shows the acute horror of psychosis, where your own reflection becomes a canvas for hallucinations, where the boundary between self and intrusion collapses entirely. These aren't just paintings, they're windows into a reality most of us will never experience. They're documentation of what it means when your brain betrays you, when the most fundamental assumptions about perception and self are no longer reliable. And perhaps most powerfully, they show us that even in the midst of this psychological chaos, the human need to create, to express, to document remains intact. Both artists, despite their suffering, produced work of remarkable technical skill and profound psychological insight. That's what makes these paintings so important and so deeply unsettling. But what do you think about this? Write your opinion down in the comments down below. And if you want to see more art that shows us what the fractured mind looks like, make sure to check out my other video right here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you there.